Long before Lara, Jade, and Samus, Time Gal was the original badass game heroine. She's not only a skilled scientist who knows how to wield a gun, but is also one of the few women to fight a dinosaur and win World War II, all while living to tell her story. Now is the time to turn away if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to spoil the story and ending of Time Gal on the Sega CD. This is Game Over, the early years. When you think about full motion video, chances are you think of games like Night Trap and Sewer Shark. But as many early adopters of CD-ROM technology will attest, there were a lot of FMV games that had absolutely nothing to do with B-list Hollywood stars and cheap production values. Much like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace before it, Time Gal was part of a long list of full motion video games that put you in control of an exciting animated adventure. You play a skilled scientist named Reika Kirishima, who discovers that an evil dictator named Luda has stolen a time machine and plans on using it to take over the world. Right from the start, this is a pretty great premise that's rife with possibilities. In fact, the setup is so good that chances are you didn't even notice that Reika, a skilled scientist, isn't wearing any pants. Maybe it's easier to jump through time when you're half naked. Speaking of which, this is a game about jumping from one famous moment in history to the next, all in the hopes of tracking down Luda and saving the day. After a brief cinema, you're dropped into 30,000 BC, where the welcoming party immediately tries to drop rocks on Reika's head. She narrowly escapes a waterfall, only to race through a forest and shoot a couple of pterodactyls. And just when it looks like everything is lost, she somehow figures out a way to transport herself to a Roman Colosseum in 44 BC. Now, in case you haven't played Time Gal before, this is pretty much the entire loop. You jump into a different time period, dodge a few obstacles, and then get sucked into a new setting. Rinse, repeat. In the case of this Colosseum fight, we're able to avoid both a Black Panther and an arena fighter before jumping to 65 million BC. It's here where we nearly get gobbled up by a dinosaur, then stomped by a Triceratops. Of course, that's nothing compared to 70 million BC, which has you going up against a fire-breathing Godzilla-type monster. We're eventually swept out of the Prehistoric Age and plopped right into the modern era. Okay, well, maybe 500 AD isn't exactly the modern age, but it is when compared to 70 million BC. This brings us a high-stakes minecart scene, along with a showdown against a slave driver. We don't really help the people before being transported to the year 999 AD. This is arguably my favorite of the time period, since we're forced to get away from, well, the Grim Reaper. It plays out a lot like a boss fight and is probably the most memorable part of the game. We eventually shoot off his head and escape at the last possible moment. Damn, that's exciting. Of course, we just jump from one bad situation to another. 1588 ditches all the supernatural stuff in favor of a tense fight with a pirate. We eventually sink the dude's battleship and warp to 1941, where we're literally standing on the wing of a kamikaze fighter jet in World War II. I'm not even going to explain how this leads to her riding a torpedo, because it just does. Speaking of wars, we decide to check in with the first Iraq War. At least I always assumed that's what it was, since this is 1991 and it's in the middle of what looks like a desert. But seeing how the original arcade version came out in 1985, a good 5 years before the Gulf War, I'm inclined to believe that this is just a solid prediction. I mean, who would have been able to guess that war and instability would break out in the future? Speaking of future past, apparently 2001 is a brightly lit hellscape where gangs terrorized half-naked women on hover bikes. And don't expect 2010 to be much better, because it finds Reika running through what appears to be the Death Star in mid-explosion. Now, if you thought you were going to have a chance to catch your breath in 3001, then guess again, because here we see Time Gal trying to escape from a giant mech. Of course, this is a lot better than the aliens you come face to face with in the year 3999, but even with all the spider webs and the dead bodies lying around, Reika knows that she's almost home. She just needs to survive through 2 more years in order to finally catch up with Luda. So the year 4000 is every bit as exciting as it sounds, complete with an intense dogfight through what appears to be a teeny tiny corridor. Reika survives, which sends her back to her time, 4001. Here's what happens when she finally confronts Luda.
Time to go.
Okay, so this ending is a bit short and anticlimactic, especially after literally killing the Grim Reaper. But there's a reason that I wanted to highlight Time Gal. What you're looking at right now is a brand new end credit scene created for the Sega CD version. It's showing us all the silly deaths that Reika could have suffered if you just pressed the wrong button along the way. This montage goes on for a good long time, like 3 minutes, and it's so much better than the real ending. You know what? I think I'm just going to turn up the volume and enjoy the rest of these credits. See you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, the early years. So here's the question I have for you. What game does time travel best? I want to hear your favorite time travel games in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be posting 2 separate videos about April Fool's Day. Don't worry, we're not going to pull any of that "we're closing down" BS, but instead focus on 2 different aspects of the holiday. One of the videos will be informative, while the other is just plain goofy. Both will have something to do with classic video game magazines, but I've already said too much. Look for the first video to drop on Wednesday, and then the big event will happen on April 1st. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.